So I want to revisit the practice of patience this morning. And it was really difficult to implement the Dharma uh, without cultivating patience. It's one of the 10, the Pali word is paramis or perfections that the Buddha taught. And he put it as number one. I mean, that's how much he um, believed it to be important. And the 10 perfections, which we've talked about, we'll talk about again in the future, are these virtues that we cultivate to live a life unobstructed by suffering. They're typically referred to as noble qualities. And as I said, of the 10, patience is of particular importance on our path. And it's simply put, it's the ability to endure difficult circumstances with equanimity. You know, it's often said in Buddhist teaching that the opposite of anger is not love, it's patience. The opposite of anger is not love, it's patience. And think about that for a moment, because it's perseverance when confronted with obstacles or when tolerating provocations without reactivity. Reactivity, of course, anger being a primary form of reactivity. So it's forbearance is the word that's often used when we're faced with challenges, either acute or chronic challenges. And if you look back over the faith traditions in the world, all the historically, um, it, it emerges that impatience is an obstacle to spiritual advancement and reduced suffering across faith traditions. It's the cause, impatience is the cause of much suffering and is typically marked by the sort of thing that signals that is often anger or sometimes anxiety, sometimes envy will evoke impatience, sometimes ego needs, any negative mood state. You know, why is this happening? I can't, this is not fair, blah, blah, blah. So, impatience, an impatient state of mind cannot coexist fully with being present and awake. It's a barrier to our present moment awareness. What we do with impatience is we focus on our frustration about a pending occurrence or an obstacle. Um, and the antidote for that is cultivating patience, which really brings us a certain degree of internal peace and outward peace for that matter. It's a function of our ability to accept things as they are in the moment. And here we're back to acceptance. Patience requires acceptance of things as they are in the moment. So, how often do we become impatient in any given day? I mean, it happens all the time. Situations over which we have no control, yet we get impatient. We get stuck in traffic. We talked about that the other day. Um, we can let impatience take over with all the suffering that it brings. And believe me, it brings a lot. Or we can accept that in certain circumstances, there's nothing we can do other than just be present with whatever's coming up, whatever's going on. Whenever we want life to be different than it is in the moment, we are caught up in impatience and we suffer. We lose our sense of humor. Typically, we indulge in self-pity. We despair, we blame, we have resentment, but nothing changes in the situation about which we find in which we find ourselves. The frustrating circumstances persist. So in patience, you can see the importance of it because whenever we don't practice in patience, all kinds of stuff arises, obstacles, and suffering ensues. Where patience really comes into play, and this will not come as a surprise to you, is in our relationships. How often do we become impatient with others, especially those close to us, because we're grasping to an expectation that they should behave differently? Why can't they hurry up? Why can't they do this? Why can't they do that? What's wrong with them? They should have put the dishes away. And this is especially true in the behavior of others towards us. Okay. We're when we are impatient, we suffer and the other person suffers. Okay. But can we bring patient understanding to those interactions? Can we bring patient understanding even to the other person's suffering so we can communicate, forgive, and begin anew in that interaction with other people? The practice of forgiveness and acceptance happens when we realize the underlying cause of our anger and impatience. It requires discernment, which we talked about the other day. It requires an understanding of the other person's unskillful behavior. Um, Serenity and calm develop when we accept the unskillful aspects of others and ourselves. And it does, now, this doesn't mean we tolerate being mistreated. You hear me say this all the time. We set clear boundaries with those who seek to hurt or exploit us. That's right action. But discernment is the tool that guides us toward right action when we encounter a toxic interpersonal situation. Okay. So the Buddha taught that there were three, he really, really emphasized the practice of patience. And he taught that there were three components to cultivate patience. The first being forbearance. Okay. Gentle forbearance is not exactly acceptance, but it's no less critical. Okay, it's putting in the pause before we respond. We talked about the pause the other day. Okay, it gentle forbearance inhibits us speaking up or acting long enough to find a more skillful course of action given whatever we're dealing with. So it helps us take a break, take a breath, whatever. The second aspect of patience that the Buddha taught was enduring hardship with calm equanimity. And we've been talking about equanimity. Remember that the Buddha said that the world, quote, rests on suffering, rests on sufferings. Yet we don't passively endure that. We just don't roll over and do nothing about it to lessen it as though we have no agency to do so. Because here again, discernment guides us on how we endure or respond to hardship to reduce our suffering. Patience is not passive. Patience is not passive. It signals us to accept and feel compassion for our suffering. That's the active part of patience. Recognizing we can't eradicate the suffering necessarily, but we can certainly reduce it. When we feel impatient in our lives, in our relationships, in our job, on our spiritual path, it's because we are resisting how things truly are. We're not accepting things as they are. So by noticing, we talked about noticing on Wednesday, our impatience, it's the cue to let go of our resistance, to relax into the situation as it is, not as we want it to be. Okay. I find that when I'm able to do this, when I can bring curiosity to what's going on in the moment, when I'm impatient, when I can catch it, it really helps me manage it. In other words, wonder what this is about. Wonder where the impatience is coming from. Many times for me, it's the ego. Well, they should do what I want them to do, or what's wrong with them, or don't they know I'm in a hurry and this line is going too slow, or whatever my ego is insisting that I, get riled up about. At those moments, impatience manifests in our thoughts and in our physical response. We feel it in the body. That's the red flag. I'm tightening up, I'm contracting, I'm irritated, I'm annoyed. Okay. And it helps to ask in those situations, what would it look like right now if I were patient, if I were accepting this? Okay. We use our present moment awareness to explore what happens to our experience at those times. And when we are able to do that, here's the payoff. When we're able to do that, relief and gratitude and contentment often follow, especially when we're rushing around like chickens with our heads cut off, trying to anticipate what is next. Okay. And then the third aspect of patience that the Buddha taught requires that we accept our experience as it is rather than how we want it to be. I say that all the time. That's so critical to our practice. Okay. And remembering that our experience is constantly changing due to impermanence. So we know it will change only if we have patience. If we only have patience about the impermanence of things, our suffering will reduce. Accepting things as they are requires noticing and discernment, which brings about profound wisdom and compassion, all of which take time as we walk this path. But when we are less likely to get caught in being overly insistent, frustrated, and demanding, all of which are the wellspring of impatience. That's why this is so important to reducing our suffering. When I can be in the world with patience, with acceptance, my days just are smoother. It's easier, and when I'm all tight and tense and frustrated, I suffer. And that usually people around me suffer. So that's the beauty of this practice of cultivating patience. Very fundamental practice. So let me stop it there and let's talk about patience.